my name is Abby Teasdale. My pronouns are she, her. I am a dirty blonde woman with dirty blonde hair, and I have glasses, and I have a black jacket and a black dress as well.
Cool. I'm Anthony Tusler. I'm 74 years old. I live here about 50 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge, so up in Sonoma County.
How did you meet Ed Roberts?
I grew up in Southern California in Pasadena. I got a spinal cord injury when I was 5 years old.
Oh my gosh, wow.
In 1952, so that's like really early. I met a guy. He was a wheelchair user. His name was Steve Diaz. And I was really lucky. I had a civil rights background. So my epiphany, my coming home was meeting Steve. We started the Disabled Students Coalition at Sonoma State University and managed through our activism to get a position established to provide services to students with disabilities. And then I engineered it so that I got hired into that position. I then worked at Sonoma State for 22 years and finally retired in 1997 and have since worked at a variety of places, including the World Institute on Disability.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
It was a trip. Let me tell you, it was, their office then was in downtown Oakland. And some mornings I'd walk into work and go through the glass doors. And as I went through the glass doors, it was like, this is weird. This was started by Ed and Judy. I mean, this is holy ground. It was also a job, and it was also could be occasionally a shitty place to work. But, you know, there is always that sense of the history of it. So Steve and I figuring out what it meant to provide services to students with disabilities. We're close enough to Berkeley that UC Berkeley became our model for how to do what we were doing. Because I assume you know your history well enough that
yeah, I do.
That Ed started at Berkeley, hopeless cripple, accepted to Cal, and then when he graduated, they had to start CIL because they needed a place to do what they did. And so UC Berkeley, PDSP, it was called, Physically Disabled Students Program. Because running through the movement still to this day is a real prejudice against people with IDD, intellectual and developmental disabilities. Just because we have a disability doesn't mean that we're free of the prejudices of the rest of the world. So I pulled up next to Ed, you know, because I knew who he was. I might have met him in Berkeley, but he certainly didn't know who I was. But I was another Crip, so it was cool to a certain extent. So anyway, at the end of the presentation on placards, I turned to Ed and say, "Boy, that's great." And he says to me, "Not until we get attendant care." That, to my mind, is Ed Roberts.
Right.
It is that focus on what's important and how the world needs to change. At least with me anyway, he never had any small talk. We could never chit chat. You know, it was always on point. And I found that with some people who've changed the world. Here in Sonoma County, the woman who started Canine Companions lived here. And so I was here when the first Canine Companion started. And talking to her is really a pain. She is so focused on what she's doing. Same kind of thing as Ed, only Ed was nicer about it. So that's how you change the world, is you have that focus and that you just keep coming back to it and you keep doing it. And that's actually why I've been successful, is I'm not like Ed. I've got way too much small talk, but I always loop back to the things that are important. And so I got involved in the disability rights movement. We started organizing at Sonoma State, and a bunch of students with disabilities came together, and all of a sudden I had these sexual partners, these women. I was at the right place at the right time. The author
Wow.
Malcolm Gladwell talks about how important luck is
Right.
in terms of what happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky that I was 50 miles from Berkeley.
Hmm.
I was lucky that I met Steve Diaz, who had a disability consciousness, as well as a labor movement consciousness. That's where the politics came together with him for him. So when I came of age, in the disability rights movement, it was right at a time when a lot of stuff came together and money started to flow into the California State University system for services for students with disabilities.
Oh, wow. That's so nice.
It's, so I started out working half-time 10-month with a half-time secretary. And fairly quickly, I was running an office that had 3 full-time employees, and I was full-time.
Right.
Not fairly quickly. It was by the end of the 70s, actually.
Right.
It also happened in the community colleges. It also happened in the UC system.
True, because I actually first myself. Sorry to interrupt, but I went
please
to
do.
Okay. I went to a college in Taft, California, which is right by Bakersfield. They have a transition to independent living program for people with
Cool. Yeah.
intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I'm autistic, so.
Oh, cool.
That's where I went for my independent living. So
I was walking down a hallway at a conference, a KPED conference, which the professional organization for people in the post-secondary education in California who provide disability services. And some guy said, "Hey, are you a student?" I said, "Yeah, it's Sonoma State." And he said, "Do you want to be a student rep on our new organization?" And I said, "Sure." So I was in at the ground floor of KPED, which was the professional organization, which is now huge. So Ed's focus on on attendant care is critical. So at some point, I hired a woman. She was able to walk, not well, but she was able to walk and had no use of her arms. She used a mouse stick to manipulate everything. And she was able to come to Sonoma State because California instituted IHSS.
wow.
Because before she had to live with her family in the foothills of the Sierras because she needed help getting dressed, bathrooming, feeding herself, all that stuff.
Right.
But when she had attendant care, she became independent. So that's critical. But at the same time, I can loop back here, is that we started changing the way the world saw us. Ed was able to change the way the world saw us because, I don't know if you've seen that headline. Really, 60 Minutes, the TV show, the news magazine show. I keep asking for your cultural references because I've taught class before and made some references that I thought young people should know, and they've been clueless. So I want to make sure that I'm not talking about stuff that is old history that nobody knows anymore. So 60 Minutes did a piece on Ed, and it would have been sometimes probably in the 80s.
Wow.
And there was a dinner at the International House in Berkeley, and it was a lot of the CIL, but a lot of UC Berkeley people who I was close to at the time. I was still the director at Sonoma State. We were pretty tight. And the placemats, they'd Xeroxed headlines from various newspapers about Ed because Ed was featured on 60 Minutes. So the biggest headline was "Hopeless Cripple Admitted to Cal" from the Daily Student
That's not a
newspaper.
nice thing to say about him.
No, but that's the way the world saw him in 68.
Right.
And so that's the kind of way he was changing the world.
Right.
So we were changing. For me, the cultural stuff was really important. So hanging out with other disabled people, having disabled girlfriends, putting on art shows about disability were all some of the ways I've always found ways that where nobody else is doing anything in the disability. It's still true today. You can find something that's disability related out in the world that nobody's talking about, that nobody's done anything.
Right.
And you can make yourself a name with relatively quickly doing it. There's other places where people have been there for decades, and to make a name for yourself, you have to be an Ed Roberts.
Right.
So accessible technology, there's a gazillion people doing that. Disability in the arts, there's a handful still today doing it.
Right.
The one time that I worked with Ed, one of the roles that Ed had was a role like Paul had at some point, which is he was the recognized leader of the disability rights movement. If you got involved in disability rights, you knew his name. So what happens in any kind of, very fluid world like this is finding out who knows what is a critical role. And the internet has changed that. But still today, it's still very much who you know.
Right. It's networking.
It's networking, exactly.
Right.
And so we had a discussion about alcohol, drugs, and disability just to bring them up to speed because they weren't hip to it, and as far as I know, neither of them are addicted. And so, and there's other people from WIT around the table. And Ed was certainly there. That led for Ed to know that I was involved in this field. So what the main way that I connected with Ed from the mid 80s on was he knew that I was the alcohol and drug guy with a disability and that I could be trusted. So people would call him and say, "Hey, we're doing stuff. Who should we call?" And they should call Anthony.
Right.
So that's my main connection to Ed.
What do you think you should be advocating for to carry on Ed's legacy?
Okay. Let me tell one more Ed story and then I'll do that. So Ed and I traveled in the same circles. It's a club.
Right.
And even though I was second tier, I was still part of the club. I was, I had my membership card. And and part of that was being close enough to Berkeley to be, we'd see each other at various things and, know each other, and I'd see Judy and keep in touch with her. And so do you know the name Cheryl Marie Wade?
Sounds a little familiar.
So I would look her up. The New York Times they had a series that was obituaries we should have written, but we didn't know about these people at the time.
Right.
Because the New York Times has done this great work in covering disability, which they didn't cover for decades.
Right.
And finally, so they did an obit on Cheryl Marie Wade, and you can find it online, that is really good. And she did a one-person show, I think was called Sassy Girl.
Sassy Girl, okay.
Because that was one of her poems. Another was disability culture rap. And she was fascinating. She had arthritis, and so her fingers were kind of kind of swollen looking. And when she shook her hands, her fingers really just bounced around. And she would use her hands to illustrate things, from a disability pride perspective.
Right.
And so I went to see, she had this one woman show down on Mission Street. I think it was the Brava Theater. And in the room, sitting at the front was Ed. Also, there was Steve Brown, who was one of the early people and who talked about disability history and disability rights. And Ed, at that point, he'd been frog breathing for years, but eventually he started using a portable ventilator.
Oh, wow.
And so vent users are a very tight community.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Longmore was a vent user. And so, and particularly as you age, if you had polio, Paul had polio, Ed had polio, as you age, it's harder to breathe, Ed doing frog breathing, so a portable ventilator was important. So at the front of the room is Ed with his portable ventilator, and you can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear it a little bit taking in air, but mostly you can hear as the air goes out of it.
Oh, yeah. So kind of like an iron lung, but not really an iron lung.
It's a portable iron lung is what it is, really.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So ventilator and iron lung are basically very similar.
Same thing. Yeah. Yeah. And so they didn't have portable ones in the beginning. They just had the big old iron lungs. They had the portable ones. So I can hear Ed at the front of the room. And Cheryl Marie Wade is in the Disability Culture Rap, and you can find it on YouTube, is talking about Ed and the founding of the disability rights movement. And it was one of those moments that I don't get often in my life, where it's like the world just comes together in a way that is profound and moving and awe-inspiring and tear-bringing. I mean, it just,
right.
To hear Ed at the front of the room and Cheryl Marie Wade celebrating him in a way that only Cheryl Marie Wade could celebrate him. I mean, oh God, it was so wonderful. I mean, it was just fat. It was great. So, okay, Ed's legacy. Ed's vision of, that we won't be put in the back bedrooms. We won't be denied access. And part of the way we do that is we change how people see us. And people see us, the arts is how we can get people to change how they see us.
Mm-hmm.
So that photo of me with the bottle of Coors, that's a different image than people are used to seeing of disabled people.
Right.
And so that's what I'm doing these days. Also, though, what I'm doing is the Sonoma Developmental Center, which used to be known as the Sonoma State Hospital, and before that, the Asylum for the Feeble-Minded. It's one of those asylums that was founded in California in the 1880s. And actually, that's a good thing that was founded, but it eventually became a place where they warehoused people with disabilities, primarily with IDD.
Mm-hmm.
They closed Sonoma Developmental Center, SDC, and the state deacquisitioned it, and so gave it to the county. And so it's going to become who knows what. In fact, the report was out this morning. I've got to read it. That's what I'll do after we're done here. And they're definitely going to put in housing. And one of the things that's critical for me is two things. One, that they keep the history of it. We've not been good about keeping the history of the disability rights movement.
Right.
That's why Crip Camp was so important.
Right.
I mean, good God. I mean, now I can say to people, I mean, I've had able-bodied people that I've been talking with say, I remember one said, I don't know how you think about Crip Camp, which is a wonderful way to start a conversation because it's very respectful.
Mm-hmm.
obviously they like it, but they're not sure I do because they haven't talked to a disabled person yet about it.
Right.
I'm not sure what you think about Crip Camp, but I really liked it. And I start going on and on and on about how much I like Crip Camp. And because Jim really got the story of the movement and also got a part of the story. I mean, the main story that became the preeminent story was that Ed Roberts founded the disability rights movement back at Cal in 1968.
Right.
The great man theory of history, which we know. One of the things Paul Longmore said is great movements create great leaders. That's how he explained Ed. Ed was a great leader because he was part of a great movement. It wasn't just Ed. It was Ed became kind of the spokesperson for this movement.
Right.
Legitimately, because he was so charismatic, clear
Right.
on what he was doing, committed. So toward the end of his life, he slowed down a lot. His breathing was not good, even with a portable ventilator. So he'd go to meetings and Ed was not nearly as dynamic as he had once been.
Right.
So it was not surprising that he, when he died, but there was a great outpouring of grief. And the memorial for him, which was held at UC Berkeley, was huge.
Wow.
There was probably 600 people there, and everybody was there. I mean, everybody I knew from the disability rights movement. So Steve and I were both there. And I mean, I remember seeing Judy. Judy probably spoke. I mean, it was a pretty amazing thing. I mean, so he was beloved, even though he could be a pain.
Right.
And he was a great leader, and it is a movement that so many of us are committed to. I mean, Judy went on to become, after WID, to be head of the Office of Special Education and Rehab Services in Washington. Clinton appointed her. She was the highest ranking disabled person, and after her, there's always been disabled people, involved in Washington. I had a podcast for a while and I was interviewing younger people in the disability rights movement, and Rebecca Coakley was on my list. And Rebecca's a little person who's now at the Ford Foundation. And I'd call up the office she was working at and say, okay, I'm ready for the interview. And they'd say, I'm sorry, but Rebecca got called to the White House. She had to go. And that's the best excuse I've ever heard for not being a part of
Right.
for missing an appointment. I'd love to use it, but I can't legitimately.
Right.
Oh, I got called to the White House. So, and Judy went on and she's been doing stuff, and she's now, I think she has a governmental appointment. The last time I talked to her was about a photographer. And we just talked briefly. She takes my phone calls, which I think is cool. Because that's part of networking is, the people will take your phone calls. And what I've always found is that by going up and talking to people and engaging them and telling what I think has always made a difference in my networking.
Right.
It's just amazing. The people that I've gotten to know. So Ed's legacy does live on.
Definitely.
And Crip Camp focuses on Judy because she's been critical to the movement. Absolutely. Oh, I was going to say, okay, so there's Ed with the Bay Area disability rights movement, but there was always this East Coast thing happening that nobody really knew a whole lot about. Because there's a lot happening in Boston. A lot happened in New York City, but Judy came out here along with a lot of other people. So New York stopped being a center for many decades later.
Right.
So Crip Camp tells a more full story, and that's wonderful.
Right.
So when I talk about disability history, I usually say, okay, those of us from the West Coast, this is what we believe. Here's our version of history, which is it all started with us in the Bay Area, but there's a lot of other stories out there as well.
Right.
So Boston, Dallas, Chicago. Chicago's got some great stuff going on, particularly around disability in the arts.
Right.
University of Illinois, Chicago has the PhD in disability studies. That's the only one that's any good in the country that I can figure out. I mean, there's other ones that are all right. You can do okay, but UIC is the place. I mean, it helps some people. So I'm responsible for that as a member of the community. I can't shirk that responsibility, but it doesn't excite me.
Mhm.
You know, it doesn't, because it's just changing one little part of the world. It doesn't have a broader possibility of changing a lot of minds and changing things for all of us. So many don't even identify as being members of our community, and they are.
Mhm.
There's no way we're going to help them if they're not going to see themselves as disabled. So we need to change the world. That's Ed's legacy.
We do.
That's it. Bottom line.
That's bottom line. Yes.
So there you go.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I love doing this stuff.
Me too.
And I love seeing young people come in, and you're really solid in your knowledge, which I really appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you so much.